Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Kos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. G'day, Curtinistas. Welcome back to Curtin's Cast. I'm Nick Dyrenfurth, Executive Director of the John Curtin Research Centre, and it's a delight to have the great man back with us this morning. Kung Fu Kos Samaras is back from his European adventure. Cosy, welcome back.
Thanks, mate.
And most importantly, how was it? How was the holiday?
It was nice.
You looked tanned, relaxed.
Yeah, relaxed.
Relaxed there.
Yeah, it's right. Spent some time in the home country, which was nice, but a bit of time in Italy as well. So yeah, it was good.
Very nice, very nice. It's so good to have you back. And again, a big thank you and shout out to Simon Welsh from Redbridge, Kos's co-conspirator, co-director at the excellent Redbridge group, along with Tony Barry, another good mate of mine. Kos, let's jump into things. There's been a lot going on in Australian and global politics, Kosy. Parliament has returned. We've seen the impressive side of Labor's extraordinary numbers in the House of Representatives. New MPs have been sworn in. Some touching speeches. The polls are starting to trickle out again post-election, and good news for Albanese Labor, bad news for the Libs, really bad news. Not a great surprise because we know the governments tend to get a boost after elections. One poll in particular sprung out at me, mate. It was a Roy Morgan poll, which was taken over the end of July. It showed federal voting intention, Labor leading on a two preferred basis across all age demographics, excluding those aged 65 and older, basically the boomers. We had 18 to 34-year-olds, Labor leading 69-31, two-party preferred. 35 to 49-year-olds, 58-42. 50 to 64-year-olds, 53-47. And it was only the boomers, the 65-plus age category, where the Liberals led. And even then, it was a slight lead, 52-48, which is not historically accurate. You've been doing polling, and this trend is being replicated across polling.
Yeah, that's
correct?
Right. Yeah, News Poll, Resolve, Redbridge, Morgan, everyone is showing the same numbers. But they're a continuation of what we saw on election night. And if you look at the polls right before election, particularly if we focus on our key seats track that we were doing for News Corp, those numbers were pretty similar. So Labor's doing really well amongst Australians under the age of 50. It's competitive amongst Australians between the ages of 50 and 60. And obviously it loses ground once we hit the baby boomer generation. The problem there is obviously that in 2028, close to half of the entire electoral roll will be made up of millennials and Gen Z. And with regards to these two generations, the coalition's doing really bad. And nothing I'm seeing since the election gives us any confidence that they are going to be in any way, shape or form in a position to actually rectify this problem.
No, there doesn't seem to be a lot of soul-searching going on.
Denialism is probably the better word.
I've heard Tim Wilson saying that he's going to sort of spit truth each and every time he speaks, but I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of manoeuvring on policy, any mea culpas, any big, sometimes the ALP engages in too much existential angst and soul-searching. I'm seeing no soul-searching, no existential angst, because they're facing an existential crisis. And I think most graphically is there are elements of the LNP who are wanting to re-prosecute the climate wars.
That's right.
They want to scrap Australia's commitment to a net zero target. And out leading the cavalry is the LNP's Matt Canavan. And there are others. So What's going on?
Well, it's pretty clear that some within their ranks are fairly comfortable in their personal electoral position, but they no longer actually harbour any real genuine aspirations for their broader movements or electoral success. If you look at which Australians are most animated about climate, it's the younger generations that we've touched on. But it isn't about the actual technicalities, whether you want to debate net zero or not. Because what voters hear when they hear the coalition talk about this and walk away from this position is not necessarily that they don't believe in the science or it's up for debate. They just think, well, you're just continuing your Trojan horse strategy when it comes to climate. And that is, you always are trying to find reasons to undermine the process. So they're just baking in a brand that has basically resulted in what we saw on election night on May the 3rd and what we will see expressed in a far more profound way come 2028. And I don't see younger Australians change their vote. Now, what we're talking about, when we said this before in previous podcasts, this is not about getting these younger Australians to come back to you. They never were voting for you in the first place. So what you need to get their to get their support, what you need to do as a movement to get their support, is a massive piece of reform that pitches towards a modern Australia. I'm not seeing that evidence at all at the moment.
No, and you've got to ask, who are they speaking to? It's a trite line, but the climate science is settled. Most countries have accepted, most Western industrialised countries have accepted net zero. So who are they speaking to? Why are they doing this? You mentioned younger voters, but in terms of winning back some of those urban seats from Labor and the Teals, the Teals held most of their seats. It's not just younger voters, it's voters across demographics. And also, this positioning in terms of net zero, what does that say to business? Business is meant to be their core, a core constituency. Small and medium-sized and big business. Business wants certainty and confidence. Yet here they are re-prosecuting the climate wars.
And again, probably another piece of evidence that some of them, not all of them, are more preoccupied with regards to how many likes they receive online rather than how many times someone puts a one next to their party's logo on a ballot paper. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. There are a group of conservative politicians right now who seem to enjoy the attention they get online. Now, I think you're probably one of many that could probably agree with me on this, and that is that you can get thousands of likes online. It doesn't mean you're going to win a ballot.
Correct, Armando.
You're simply just engaging a very partisan audience. And, we do know that social media is all about partisan activity. It's not about converting or encouraging people to think differently. So I think that, we are looking at a situation now where that unless they do something different and drastic, their situation, their electoral situation is going to get worse. Now, I know some people within the conservative side of politics will say, well, just wait until the transition process collapses and so on. Well, this is the problem. Most Australians that we talk to don't mind that this process is going to be difficult. They don't mind that it might be more expensive. They just want it done because they think climate's a problem.
I was very interesting. I was reading The Guardian this morning and it ran a story that young liberals from New South Wales had urged the coalition to distance itself from Sky News, Sky After Dark, and blame the MAGA, Make America Great mirage for Dutton's loss. So some people have actually re-entered the world of political reality. It's the youngsters. They're saying we can't be a movement of the fringe right, and that the fringe right of the Liberal membership has too much influence over policy, over and campaigning, and that immediate approach.
Well, Matt Canavan recently put up a map of how many of their state branches have moved motions opposing net zero and proudly boasted about it. Again, he's pitching to the fringe right. Now, all those states he put up just happen not to be held by the Liberal Party. So Western Australia, South Australia, and others. The one he didn't put up was Queensland. Yet to see whether the Queensland LNP is going to walk away from net zero, which I seriously doubt they will. But we'll see.
And it's not just on climate. So climate's one aspect, but I don't think climate wasn't front and centre of the election campaign. This was most elections are decided by the economy and material issues, and the Labor Party, I think we can make a good argument, was able to define and dominate the political centre on the 3rd of May 2025. Yet on the economy, it seems clear to me, trying my best to take off my partisan blinkers, but they are engaging in denialism on the economic debate too, and specifically around super and tax denialism.
Well, a good example was obviously their reaction to the super tax policy announced by Jim Chalmers, obviously impacting on those individuals that may have $3 million in their super account. Now, when we speak to most Australians, particularly younger Australians, going back to that demographic problem again, we ask them, when's the last time you've looked at your balance? They say, look, the last month. What is the amount that's in your account? It ranges from around $30,000 to $50,000. And then we ask them the other critical question: do you think that you're ever going to have $3 million in your super account? And the answer is absolutely no. So the majority of Australians just think it's a bit of a fantasy to suggest that one day they, in their 20s now, in their early 30s, will have $3 million in their account. They don't believe it. They don't believe the economic and business institutions that are screaming from the top of a mountain saying that's what you're going to have when you get into your 60s, because they don't believe a lot of things that these constituencies say to them. So I think, Labor's on a fairly solid footing here in terms of winning the politics of it. Now, we can argue about whether it's good policy or not, but this is about politics and about who wins elections. And at the end of the day, most Australians think that, no, they're not going to have 3 million. And yes, people with 3 million should be taxed more.
Yeah, it's very strange political positioning, Kos. One analogy we can use by way of comparison is COVID. Now, there were two state Labor opposition leaders, Peter Malinauskas, who we're speaking to in a few weeks' time.
That's
Can't
right.
wait to speak to Melly. And Chris Minns, who was then the New South Wales Labor opposition leader. They decided, they could see what was happening. They made a judgment that in the first year and a half, COVID, the public didn't want to see partisan bickering. It was time to be singing from the same hymn sheet, to offer bipartisan support. And then later in the electoral cycle, as the peak of COVID, slowly drifted downwards when people started getting vaccinated. A majority of the population had caught COVID, so we had a level of herd immunity. Then they pivoted. Now, I would have thought that the coalition should take a leaf out of the pages of Chris Minns and Peter Malinauskas and say, at the moment, given the size of Labor's majority in the House of Reps, now's the time to engage with the reform process. And then we're going to talk to our Deputy Director, Dominic Maher, about what the JCRC has done around productivity, but they don't seem to be engaging with the reform process, offering any semblance of bipartisan support, which would seem to make sense at a crude, pragmatic political judgment level.
Again, we go back to that generational problem that they're facing. So conversations around that the media are having and the political class are having around productivity and so on are still, in my opinion, and I will say even to this applies to Labor's side of politics as well, they're yet to address the deep anxiety that exists amongst young Australians about the future. It isn't just about climate. It's about the impact of AI that will have on their jobs. We recently saw the PwC in the UK laid off 175 university entry-level jobs.
Atlassian knocked off 300.
That's right. Replace them with a bot. Now, when we speak to most young Australians, they say, look, I was promised that if I studied hard and I went to university and I got myself a degree, that I'll get a good job and I'll be set up for life. That's clearly not the case. Social contract that I signed up to is broken. Now, that was already broken when it comes to housing. And we're now actually about to threaten their occupations.
And middle-class jobs, guys.
That's right.
Middle-class jobs.
That's right.
AI, we're going to talk in depth about AI next week with Dominic.
Yes.
Because we've got an agnostic view. We're not doomers and we're not zoomers, but AI is going to come for middle-class jobs and it's going to replace middle-class professional jobs.
Right.
And again, this should be the Liberal Party's core constituency.
Yep.
Yet they're not engaging with this issue.
They're not. And whether it applies to whether we're talking about tax, whether we're talking about reform that may provide some level of confidence and safety for these Australians. The coalition's not having this conversation, but I'll say look, we have seen some statements by Jim Chalmers and others with regards to AI and so on. I think not enough has been said to curtail the anxiety that we're picking up in our research, and it's off the charts.
So on that, yes, your research. So we're talking about this parallel universe that Liberals inhabit at the moment, okay? And you've also noted that, Labor needs to more strongly engage with people's anxiety and fears around AI. I know Jim's done a lot of...
Follow the union's lead.
Jim's done a lot of thinking about this. He wrote a book.
Yes, that's right.
About which was dealing with how do we preserve the fair go in the machine age. He wrote a book about this. So he's thought about it. But the Liberals must be getting the same kind of research delivered to them, particularly as regards young people. It must be being picked up in their quantitative and qualitative research, their focus groups. This must be the message from young people across climate, across economic issues, jobs, job security, the threat of AI, this in general, this rage at a system where, that social contract that you're talking about, this between generations, this covenant between generations, that we should pass on a better Australia to the next, that the next generation should enjoy a better standard of living. We've spoken at length about this rage and frustration, particularly amongst younger working class people. They must be picking this up.
Clearly they're not. I mean, if you look
they need to get a better pollster.
Well, that's right, correct. Well, that's another problem they're facing. But if you look at what the sort of things that are impacting younger Australians, yes, we've mentioned climate. We've talking about AI. We've spoken about the pandemic, the inflationary crisis that's hit them, all at a time when they are beginning their lives and their working lives and they're becoming of age, whether they're starting young families or whether they're just entering into their 20s. Those sort of challenges, I think, will need to go all the way back to the Great Generation with the Great Depression. The Great Generation grew up during the Great Depression. Their lives were drastically different to their parents, and we saw government's response to those challenges. Particularly if you look at, Roosevelt and his response with the New Deal, that bolted down a generation to believe in the state and to commit to the state, gave them confidence that the government of the day was in the business of protecting them against these huge existential threats that were buffeting their parents but now buffeting them as emerging adults. Now, I think with Jim Chalmers, yes, he's been doing a lot of deep thinking about this, and you could say at least him as a politician is talking about it. And so if anyone's paying attention, they'll think, okay, well, the Labor side is thinking about it, at least. On the coalition side, crickets. And again, if they think they can just roll up in 2028 and roll out the usual campaign around just, sound grabs and policies and so on, they're in for a very significant rude shock, because by then we'll have a lot of proof points of two things. Firstly, the impact of AI, and secondly, Labor's response to it.
Yeah. And symbolic, cause also there's no thought leadership outside of the parliamentary party.
No.
So we've spoken about this previously, and I made a partisan point about our think tanks out muscling them finally. Symbolic of this is that the new head of the Centre for Independent Studies is the former editor of the Australian Financial Review, Michael Stutchbury. And nothing against Stutch.
He's a good guy.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, I like him.
But he's 65.
Yes.
And nothing ageist.
No.
But there is no regeneration going on here at an intellectual level.
I mean, I still would consider that a pretty good appointment and a step up compared to to what they normally are accustomed to. At least on this occasion, they've actually thought outside the square. He's actually quite a deep thinker, a serious intellectual. So I'd say that's a positive step. But yes, there's the age thing there, and it's still not a sign that they're heading in the right direction.
No, because the critical point. So we're talking at young people. Young people understand deep in their bones that the system is broken. It is gamed against them.
And it's going to get broken even more.
Stutch doesn't believe, and his predecessor, Tom Switzer, a guy I really get along with, he's a deep thinker, particularly on, political philosophy. He gets it. He's quite an interesting figure. He opposed the Iraq War because he thinks that you can't impose, thought it was a mistake. He's a so-called paleo-conservative. He thinks that the projection of American force cannot be, you can't change, can't impose democracy on other nations.
Pick up a history book. He's probably right.
G'day, Tom, if you're listening. I'm big upping you here, mate. But neither Tom or Stutch, I think, deep in their bones, understand that the economic system and the political system are broken, and that they don't understand the existential crisis that the political right in this country is facing. And they can look overseas as well. In the UK, we're moving towards a 5-party system. Reform is outpolling both the Tories and Labor. So
it's an important point here, right? So if you look at the UK reform and in the US Trump replaced the GOP. So when we talk about voters supporting Trump, they're not supporting the Republicans. They're not supporting the old guard. They're supporting someone who replaced them and turned it on its head. You go to the UK, again, the anti-establishment sentiment is through the roof. Lo and behold, Reform is doing really well in the polls and could win hundreds of seats if a general election was held there today. So, for Conservatives in Australia to think that is a sign of resurgence for their brand, no. The Conservatives in this country are viewed by voters, the same types of voters that will find Trump attractive or Farage attractive. They view the Conservatives in this country as the establishment, as part of the problem, the reason I'm in this mess, the reason I can't buy a home, the reason you're denying climate change, the reason why the tax system seems to be skewed against me. They pin the Conservatives as that. So if they're hoping that there's a sign that things are about to turn in their favour, they're going to be bitterly disappointed.
Yeah, so there needs to be an insurgency here. They need an outsider to come in and shake things up. We spoke to Andrew Hastie. He could possibly be
his biggest challenge
the
is
type of leader.
If he gets control of the show, he could be burnt to the ground by the time he gets control of it.
Yes. But again, I think they could actually, if they want to think outside the square, they could look at Labor's history, certainly from the late 1960s onwards. If you look, Albo's actually a bit of an outlier here because he's a creature of the party. He was a machine man. But if you look at the 3 Labor federal leaders who took the party out of opposition and into government, Whitlam, Hawke and Rudd, why were the public so attracted to them? Now, my thesis, is that they were seen as different.
Outsiders.
They were seen as outsiders. Whitlam was a well-educated, middle-class
different to what they were used to.
lawyer.
That's right.
He looked and spoke like middle-class professionals. Okay,
That's
so he
right.
attracted them to Labor. It was symbolic, and it was material. It was a break. It was we're a different party to the party that ran around in the 50s and 60s.
That's right.
With its rigid ideology and kept losing
Yeah.
and enjoying losing.
That's right.
Okay, no offense to Arthur Caldwell there. He's actually a good, decent man. Hawke comes along, similar thing. Hawke is a creature of the Labor movement, but he's different.
He's definitely different.
Rudd, bit like Whitlam, for all his foibles and shortcomings, Rudd's message was, I am different to the Labor Party that you have seen between 1996 and 2005. I'm different. They saw that and they voted for him. They liked it. So, and also, he's disgraced himself lately, old Mark Latham. He's really lost. Mark, if you're listening, you're probably not listening. You probably don't care. You've lost the plot, mate. He's out there. He's obviously having personal problems. He's out there taking photos of MPs and pinching MPs on the bum in Parliament. He's also now talking about he's calling Sky News Sky Jews now. So he has gone off on the Steve. He's gone off on the sort of Steve Bannon alt-right magical mystery roller coaster. I don't know what planet, but I will say this about Latham. He was initially very when he took over the leadership of the Labor Party before the 2004 election. He was really popular. He entered the 2004 election ahead. The thing which appealed to people, as I continue to hammer this point, and he's because he openly styled himself as an outsider. And he actually, for all his shortcomings, he was the one in the early 2000s and the late 1990s who identified the new divide in Australian politics. It wasn't based, I still think we live in a class society, but he identified the new divide between insiders, who were typically, knowledge class professionals, the political class of both parties, all political parties, who lived basically within 10 kilometres of the CBD, and the outsiders in the outer suburbs. He got it. He then sort of imploded, but the Liberals could actually, if they're able to do the hard thinking, it's there. The examples are there.
They are, but there's a caveat to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Those leaders were successful in attracting the attention and support of baby boomers. The baby boomer generation, and a lot of people pour scorn over them, but they were an incredibly stable generation and also the most prosperous generation in human history across the Western world.
Yes.
And they created industries such as the advertising industry, and countless others. They were a generation that were predictable. So as long as you pitched yourself in a certain way, you could pull it off, hence the three Labor leaders that you mentioned. I think what we're now dealing with, though, is a generation of Australians, and you find them obviously overseas as well, who are looking for something a little bit more different and more radical than just an outsider. So I think what I'm trying to say here, Nick, is that the challenge that the Liberal Party is facing, and I don't think they fully understand just how severe this is, the type of person that they need has to match also the policy reform. So they have to turn up to the plate with a very different looking Liberal Party, one that actually pitches a modern narrative that, well, the type of reform that we're looking at is a sort of reform that occurred when Menzies created the Liberal Party. Post-Second World War, we all know how badly the Conservatives were doing in the 40s. Menzies knew there was a crisis. It was existential. So that a number of them took drastic steps and set up a new movement.
Yeah.
That's how big of a problem the Liberal Party is facing today.
Yet they've got their head, the ostrich, the head stuck in the sand because we've talked about climate. We've talked about those material economic issues, super, tax. Yesterday, I just spoke about 2004. Yesterday, there were calls for the reintroduction of the baby bonus payment. And guess who led the calls? John Howard.
I'm shocked.
This was introduced by Peter Costello, who famously, initiated this policy of a $3,000 lump sum payment to new parents, which later increased to $5,000, which was credited with boosting birth rates. He passed this this is a payment which was introduced in 2004. Actually, so we actually in 2011 surpassed the post-war baby boom. Costello famously said Australians should have one for mum, one for dad, and one for the country. And now they're running around saying, let's bring it back. And the Nationals leader, David Littleproud, has backed it in. But not just backed it in, he said $3,000 won't cut it in today's economy. There's a disconnect between what's happening with the ongoing cost of living crisis. It hasn't gone away.
Those in their 30s who may be thinking of having children, their problem doesn't just get confined to $3,000 or $5,000 or $7,000. It's in the tens of thousands of dollars, and it runs over many, many years. Many of them now appreciate that they may never be able to buy a home. It's not crazy to think that, for example, that in Sydney, you will find it will be very difficult for someone in their 20s to even rent, let alone buy a home. So we're talking to hundreds of thousands of dollars when it comes to problems and when it comes to starting a family. Hence, millennials are now having children much later in life, and hence one of the biggest growth industries is, of course, IVF, because a lot of women now are choosing to start having a family much later in life, and obviously are experiencing fertility issues, and that is a market that is exploding. Why? Because it takes millennials now well into their 30s, late 30s, before they are comfortable financially to think about having children. Now that comfort doesn't come with $7,000 or $10,000, doesn't come with a baby bonus. It comes with massive reform that deals with housing and a whole range of the other existential issues that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and reforming the tax system.
That's right.
Reforming regressive elements of the tax system. The ACTU are out and about. They've got they've out and about with proposal to reform the tax system. And again, I get the sense that the Liberals don't want to deal themselves into the mainstream debate. I think there is going to be another debate about negative gearing. There has to be another debate about negative gearing. Should it be restricted to one property?
Which is about 70% of investors.
Is this a bold or popular move? Would it be both if Labor went down this path? At least have the conversation. And you have previously said that the Liberal Party needs to be in the business of slaying some of its shibboleths, but they're not.
No, they're not.
And tax, again, on tax, they won't do it. They're listening to the Business Council of Australia. They're listening to vested interests, and they're placing themselves out of the mainstream debate, which is happening in this country right now.
Well, there's that. There's the tax side of things, but we only have to look at, for example, working from home. There's another one. Every time there is a discussion about alleviating the burden of young families, so allowing mums and dads to work from home, for example, or making it easier for them to buy a home by changing the tax system and so on, they are at the forefront of opposing it. Once upon a time, the Liberal Party, particularly in the 50s and 60s, was the party of the family, right? That's why they encouraged people to have children because they made it easy. The economy made it so easy. Now it seems that as a political movement, they seem to be always fixated on austerity, making it much more difficult for people to get on with life. And of course, we had the Allen government yesterday or over the weekend announce that they are going to try to enshrine the working from home in the law.
2 days.
2 days a week. And we know there's some legal challenges there, but what was the Conservatives' response? We'll just have to look at it. Now, if I was in their shoes and if I was keen to send a very clear signal to the voters that you and I have been talking about, I would have instantly backed it in. And I said, irrespective of what challenges this government may face, we, the opposition, are going to support them. And it would have been a very strong signal that they understood what the politics were, because this is more about politics than anything else as well. Well, what the Allen government's doing is sending a very clear signal to young families in Victoria. They get them. They understand the burden. And I think they did a presser yesterday promoting the announcement, and they had a couple, and of course the partner was a tradie, right? So they forget that, yes, of course tradies can't work from home, but did they bother to ask the tradie if the tradie enjoys having their partner having the ability to work from home? Of course they didn't ask, did they? Because of course the answer is yes. Relieves burden, cuts petrol prices, makes it a happier family. Happy families have more kids.
And ultimately, I think this comes down to political judgment, because it's about judging where Australia is at the moment, and particularly that the Gen Y and Gen Z cohorts, and engaging with the zeitgeist of Middle Australia, and a judgment over where are they at. And I think broadly speaking, we can say that they're in a mood for fairness over ideology. Real outcomes over rigid theory and abstract ideas and action.
That's right. Empathy over austerity. They want a caring society. They want a society that doesn't punch down, doesn't look for victims. They want an Australia that is very different to the one they grew up in. That's for sure.
And where are the Greens in all this, Cos? Elizabeth Waters is elected leader. They're probably out there on the Sydney Harbour Bridge yesterday. Some naughty people on X, formerly known as Twitter, have been asking why haven't Cos and I spoken about
what?
Harbour Bridge protests.
Why?
Earth, broadcasting planet Earth now, we don't have to speak about every single event which takes place in Australia.
That's right. No, I think having I think it was over 100,000 people march.
It was significant.
Yeah, it was significant protest and understandable. But equally, if we go back to the point about the Greens, they still will be competitive in 2028. We've got to remember that at the recent federal election, 30% of all Gen Z across the entire country voted for them. So, that's likely to stick. It's likely to stay unless Labor does something really drastic in its reforms. It could break that up and grab a lot more votes. But if Labor's not bold, this generation will get older. There are more of Gen Z enrolling to vote every day now, so more coming through the ranks, and their voting behaviour is not changing.
Yeah, Cos, I always come back. There's a really great line from Lindsay Tanner gave the John Button oration, which you were fortunate enough to give.
I did, yes.
At the Melbourne Writers' Festival in 2008. He delivered this killer line. This is when Labor was riding high federally in the polls, was governing, I think, in every state and territory.
It was, yes. At that point, yes.
He used this line, and it stayed with me. He said, the seeds, and he was talking about political parties, he said, the seeds of one's destruction are often sown in the times of greatest success. And he was right. And the seeds, and I think Labor needs to be really careful and not being caught up with hubris. I think the Prime Minister is aware of that.
Of course they are.
The size of that win also means that, you've got, you can lose caucus discipline. But most importantly, that they have to act on housing, on tax settings, on revenue, on jobs, issues like AI. And this is the way I see it, because 2022 was a rejection of Morrison, and the Albanese government was on its L plates. Okay,
correct.
3 years later, that thumping win. Be careful. Be careful with that. It was also, again, that they thought that the Albanese government was competent, it was stable, and it was much better than the alternative. So Labor got the P plates. In 3 years' time, in 2028, it's about will this Labor government get a third term? Does it graduate from the P plates to the full licence?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they got 35% of the vote and ended up with 94 seats. If you and I were having that discussion 10 years ago and said, one day Labor's going to win 94 seats with only 35% of the primary vote, we all would laugh.
Yeah.
But it was possible because 70+% of that other vote, that is Australians who voted for something other than the major parties, were millennial and Gen Z, who overwhelmingly preferenced Labor and put Labor above the Liberal Party in all the key seats. So again, we go back to that generational problem, right? If you're not offering these voters a solution, the chances of, yes, you're going to win 2028. It's unlikely, highly unlikely that the coalition's even going to get close. But you're going to get a lot of volatility. You're going to get a lot more independents getting elected. There's going to be a lot more problems. Your primary vote could drop more. So if you want to remedy that problem, if you want to set up yourself as a government that could be compared to the Menzies government of post-Second World War in terms of success, then reform, significant reform right now is needed.
Indeed. And we're going to see how that unfolds over the next 3 years. Kung Fu Kos, it's been great to have you back.
Cheers,
Thank
mate.
you, Curtin Estes. Check us out at Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Refer mates. And we'll catch you next week on Curtin's Cast. Ciao and arrivederci.